Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Grayzone. I'm Max Blumenthal, and I think I'm on time today. We had planned this for 12:05 Eastern Time. I'm here with award-winning Canadian journalist Aaron Mate, who's joining us from somewhere on the West Coast. So Aaron's up very early for a Grayzone stream. Thanks
Yes,
for
9
joining us,
a.m.
Aaron.
So early. Yes, 9
For
a.m.
I mean, I'm just not like
Ungodly.
an expansive, I'm not an expansive person in the morning. I'm not. This is pushing it for me.
Yeah, this
But
is
I
early.
want to, yeah.
Well,
Great
and we are
light
on
out
time.
there.
We are on time, and so it's a historic day, and it's also historic because for the first time, the U.S. has not vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Although, as we're going to get into, they successfully watered it down before it passed. But still, there is something historic about what's just happened.
Well, yeah, that this is sort of a vision of a world without the U.S. And it's the first time a ceasefire resolution has passed. I actually want to start this one. It's not in our notes, but I want to start by just showing the reaction to this vote as it passed, because this is unusual. And obviously, if you look at the reaction, long overdue.
Draft resolution contained in document S/2024/254. Please raise their hand. Those against. Abstention. The result of the voting is as follows: 14 votes in favor, 0 vote against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2728, 2024.
So
If you follow these, if you follow these UN Security Council resolutions, you almost never see that happen. People applauding after a vote, and you can see it's palpable because people are so relieved that for the first time the U.S. has not blocked a resolution calling for a ceasefire, which the whole world supports, and that's why you see the applause there at the end.
Yeah. The U.S. has blocked how many? 3 so far?
At least more if you count amendments. And in this case too, they did block an amendment, or at least they blocked wording that would have called this ceasefire permanent. They changed that to lasting, I believe, because they don't want to foreclose the possibility of Israel resuming its genocide campaign. And Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, she went out of her way to explain in her little speech on this vote that this is a non-binding resolution. So basically, if you listen to her carefully here, it's pretty clear the Biden administration's strategy is, rather than humiliate itself with yet another veto, they're going to let this one pass, but just declare that it's non-binding.
This is self-described Louisiana.
Members of this council to take some of our edits and improve on.
Sorry, Max, say it again.
No, go ahead.
This resolution. Still, certain key edits were ignored, including our request to add a condemnation of Hamas. And we did not agree with everything in the resolution. For that reason, we were unfortunately not able to vote yes. However, as I've said before, we fully support some of the critical objectives in this non-binding resolution. And we
notice how quickly she said in this non-binding resolution. She said it kind of in passing, but that's their line now. So this is not actually enforceable by UN Security Council action. This is just non-binding.
Believe it was important for the council to speak out and make clear that our any ceasefire must come with the release of all hostages. Indeed, as I've said before, the only path to a durable end to this conflict is the release of all hostages.
So there it is. It's non-binding. That's why the U.S. didn't veto it. So they let it pass, but they're also saying it's toothless.
And you know, before we just analyze the impact of the resolution on a potential Israeli assault on Rafah and everything else, let's consider what kind of language the U.S. was trying to insert into this resolution, because we hear Linda Thomas Greenfield complaining that it didn't condemn Hamas. Here is her discussing the U.S. the language the U.S. wanted.
Suffering. And I urge all council members to vote yes, to vote for a resolution that at long last condemns Hamas for its horrific terrorist attacks and sexual violence, that makes clear that all civilians.
So the U.S. wanted to insert condemnation of Hamas for systematic mass rape on October 7th, something that to this point has been exposed as a gigantic hoax put forward by the Israeli government. And basically what they're doing is they're raising the bar so much that it's impossible to actually meet the U.S. bar. And that gives them a way to abstain, because the U.S. can't possibly vote in support of a permanent ceasefire resolution. That would never be possible. But they at least relieved the Security Council of having to deal with a U.S. veto. And for the first time, we have at least a ceasefire resolution, however non-binding it might be. This is infuriating Netanyahu. Netanyahu has pledged to withdraw a delegation he was going to send to Washington, where the Biden administration was going to plead more for them not to go into Rafah. I think the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, is already here in Washington. And it's a way of Biden screwing over Netanyahu, because he is going to be invited by House Majority Leader Mike Johnson to address a joint session of Congress in a repeat of Netanyahu's address to Congress when he stabbed Barack Obama in the back over the Iran deal at the invitation of Republican House Majority Leader John Boehner. So basically, Netanyahu is interfering in U.S. politics. This is Biden's way of getting him back. It's the second abstention we've seen, maybe in the last decade, of a resolution that Israel opposed. The other one was on Israeli settlement activity. The Obama administration abstained. So basically, this has a lot to do with U.S. domestic politics, and the Biden administration also not, I don't think they could afford to just veto another ceasefire at this point, with famine looming, with every aid agency operating in the region warning of imminent famine. I think it was a little extreme. So it really just shows how pathetic they are, that they can't actually support the resolution, and that they were still twisting arms to water down the language in support of Israel, while Tony Blinken is acting as Israel's lawyer and pushing the Israeli line in negotiations in Doha.
Yeah, and it comes just days, and this is really worth stressing. As we saw in that last clip from Linda Thomas Greenfield, they were trying to push this resolution pretending to call for a ceasefire, which Russia and China vetoed. And when Russia and China did that, the U.S. did that, and the U.S. media followed suit and trying to pretend as if Russia and China were now opposed to a ceasefire, when really, if you read that U.S. text, it's like it called for, it supported the imperative of a ceasefire, which is weird wording, the imperative of a ceasefire, not imposing a ceasefire, the imperative of a ceasefire in connection with the release of all hostages. So basically, it's just repeating Israel's demand that Hamas release all of its captives, and then Israel gets to resume the genocide when it wants to, because the U.S. resolution even allowed for Israel to conduct future operations. So it was a transparent scam to not only pretend to call for a ceasefire, but also, as we saw in that clip from Linda Thomas Greenfield, to push and validate the talking points used to justify the genocide by asking the UN to condemn Hamas for alleged sexual violence. So that was a complete scam, which Russia and China vetoed. And now, sufficiently humiliated, they were forced to let this one pass today. But again, they're doing it on the condition that this is non-binding in their view. This is not. So basically, they're saying we let this pass because it's toothless. It can't be enforced.
And I mean, smaller states like Guyana or Algeria lit into the U.S. over the sham that it was trying to pull at the UN. Let's listen to like 30 seconds of the Guyanese delegation explaining why they could not support the U.S. resolution.
Contrary to some media and other reports, this resolution does not call for an immediate ceasefire. Instead, we note that it, and I quote, determines the imperative for a ceasefire, end of quote, and calls for support for diplomatic efforts that are ongoing outside of the UN. The demand for a ceasefire should not be linked to or conditioned on the release of hostages. Two wrongs cannot make a right, and the Palestinian people should not be collectively punished and themselves held hostage for the crime of others.
So, I mean, pretty plainly spoken. And what she's saying is the U.S. is trying to deprive the Palestinians, force them to give up all their negotiating leverage and basically end all negotiations for the release of their own hostages, people who've been languishing in Israeli prisons under increasingly harsh conditions, in order to not get slaughtered and ethnically cleansed. And here's the Israeli anti-ambassador to the UN, someone who would like to wage a series of drone strikes on the UN building, Gilad Erdan, I think one of the worst diplomats to ever serve in the history of humanity. And I don't just mean that as someone who would like to see the Zionist project dismantled right now. I'm saying that just as an objective observer of diplomacy. This is someone who's done enormous damage to Israel's cause.
There is no country that seeks to avoid an operation in Rafah more than Israel. Is it your sons and daughters that you are sending into battle? No, it is our children who are making the ultimate sacrifice in defense of their homeland. The only way to achieve a real and permanent ceasefire is to eliminate Hamas's capabilities entirely. And this cannot happen unless all of their battalions are demolished. You cannot extinguish a fire by putting out most of it. The fire will grow again and spread. This is what will happen without an operation in Rafah.
Well, I'm glad he's replaced his Nuremberg Law era Jewish star with just the ribbon that, celebrities wore at the Oscars. But, consider the logic there. There can't be a ceasefire without a gigantic massacre in an area where 1.5 million refugees are concentrated in order to dismantle the Hamas battalions that Israel has failed to dismantle in the north. Why are they at Al-Shifa hospital? We'll talk about this later. Why is Israel blowing up the surgical ward of Al-Shifa hospital? Why are they carrying out field executions outside Al-Shifa? Why are they arresting all the journalists there? Because they have failed to demolish Hamas in the north where they withdrew their troops. So they've totally failed militarily. And now they're failing diplomatically. They've irritated Biden to the point where they're at least abstaining. And, it's a free fall from here. What are they going to do? Lean on the congressional Republicans and wait till Trump gets into office? That seems to be the strategy.
Yeah, well, there was this proposal for Netanyahu to come and address Congress, just as he did to undermine the Iran nuclear deal when Obama was president. And Netanyahu has canceled this Israeli delegation's visit to Washington. They were about to leave on a flight from Tel Aviv, so they canceled that flight of Genocide Airlines. But then you have to wonder how much of that is just performative, how much of that is actually just Netanyahu and Biden playing off each other. Biden gets to pretend as if he's standing up to Israel. Netanyahu gets to pretend as if he's standing up to the U.S., when really the same support will continue. The arms are still flowing. The Senate just voted to strip funding for UNRWA. By the way, Chris Van Hollen, Democratic senator, has been speaking out against the attacks on UNRWA. He voted for that measure as well. So Netanyahu still has the support, not only Biden, but even of Democrats who are supposed to be his staunchest critics.
$3.8 billion more of weapons to Israel, eliminating UNRWA, which is the main provider of education, aid, food to the majority of the population of Gaza. So that's U.S. Congress. It really shows, like, if anyone pays members of Congress enough, they'll vote for anything. I mean, that's really all that happened.
Yeah. And Israel followed up that vote by announcing that they're not going to let any UNRWA trucks deliver anything to the north. So, the Senate basically, including Democrats, put the rubber stamp on Israel continuing to try to destroy UNRWA, including blocking its trucks from entering the north.
Yeah, I don't know how. I mean, we're kind of jumping ahead in what we'd plan to do. So I don't know if I do want to cover what happened in Moscow a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And then we'll get back to. We're going to get back to the Gaza situation, and we're going to bring on two of our contributors, Jeremy Loffredo, who delivered one of the most disturbing and, I think, hard-hitting reports that we've published since October 7th, after he embedded himself within one of these grassroots Israeli blockades of aid to Gaza and really showed the true face, the true horror of Jewish Israeli society in genocide mode. And we're going to have Hekmat Aboukhater, who went undercover into a lobbying session of the anti-Syrian lobby in Congress and turned up some really revealing recordings. So we want to make sure we budget time for them, but we also want to cover one of the more significant developments. I think it's a significant development in the Ukraine proxy war, even though it's hard to prove or demonstrate that it's directly related, which is the assault, the terrorist attack on the Crocus City Hall Theater in Moscow, in which something like 120 are dead, 180 are wounded. The toll of the injured and dead keeps rising. This is the worst terrorist attack on Russia in 20 years since Chechen jihadists assaulted another theater in Moscow. Or no, it was a school, and carried out a siege of a school in Russia. This attack has been officially blamed by the United States on ISIS-K, the ISIS Khorasan group, which is said to have gestated in the destabilized atmosphere of Afghanistan. And it took the U.S. 24 hours to come to that conclusion. It took the U.S. 1 month to come to the conclusion that Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda organization were responsible for 9/11. I don't even know exactly what ISIS-K is, but I guess we're not able to jump to any conclusions here. A lot of people have already made up their mind on who's responsible. But I want to go into the interrogation of one of those who's said to be responsible and the history of ISIS. But first, before that, Aaron, I mean, what's your take on this? A lot of people in the kind of anti-imperialist Twitter world are either blaming Ukraine or the US or US and British intelligence for being behind this somehow. What do you think of that?
I mean, people might call me a gatekeeper for this, but the official story, that this is ISIS-K, makes sense to me. They are enemies of Russia. They've carried out attacks on them before. ISIS, to the extent ISIS-K is linked with ISIS, they hate Russia for many reasons, including that Russia defeated them in Syria. So they've been wanting to take revenge for that. So for that reason alone, it made sense to me that this would be ISIS-K. They also were enemies in Afghanistan, and they've hit out at all sorts of targets. They've hit out at Iran. They took responsibility for the attack on U.S. forces in Kabul when U.S. forces were leaving. So the idea that this would have been directed by the U.S. or Ukraine, it just doesn't make sense to me. I don't think they operate that way. Not that they can't, help create groups and inspire groups that carry out these kinds of attacks, but direct involvement just doesn't make sense to me. But again, I'm going off intuition there, not any solid facts. But the idea that ISIS would attack Russia, to me, is just consistent just with Syria alone. Because as John Kerry said, it was Russia that was instrumental in defeating ISIS in Syria, because in Kerry's words, they didn't want an ISIS government, as the U.S. was sitting back and watching ISIS grow inside Syria. So would it be consistent then for ISIS to want to take revenge on Russia around the world? Yeah, to me it is.
Okay. I mean, you're going to get a lot of heat for that, but at the same time, there's no evidence, and I like hard evidence. There's no evidence that they're of foreign intelligence directing this attack. It was an ISIS style attack, like the Bataclan Theater, for example, of just a group of zombified criminal class characters who just come in and start mowing people down randomly. However, the timing follows Vladimir Putin's massive landslide victory in an election, which gives him a major mandate to expand the military operation in Ukraine. It's no longer a special operation. It's a straight up war. They're not even saying that. It follows threats by Victoria Nuland twice, or vows for some nasty surprises on the battlefield for Vladimir Putin. And she's referring specifically, this was during a speech she gave at the CSIS think tank in Washington, referring specifically to asymmetrical threats that were going to be directed by the U.S. against
But Max,
Russia.
let me ask you there. Don't you think if Nuland really is going, do you think Nuland, if say Nuland was complicit in a terror attack like this, she'd be previewing it publicly by vowing nasty surprises? To me, that's not an argument. Some people have used that as an argument in favor of U.S. being involved in this. To me, that's it's the opposite. Why would Victoria Nuland preview a terrorist attack if indeed the U.S. was involved in it? If anything, they would want to pretend they have no involvement whatsoever. So it's just not. I think she was talking about, because the U.S. is directing Ukraine's attacks on the battlefield. She was talking about the battlefield, including going after Crimea, which is what she really wants to do.
Yes.
I don't think she's referring to terrorist attacks on concert halls inside Russia.
All right. Well, this is I can forgive the conspiracy theorists for their theories. This is sort of like, I can understand why RT yesterday hosted Alex Jones to present this as a kind of continuation of Operation Gladio. I can understand why people are getting conspiratorial, and just because you're conspiratorial doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Just the timing, the fact that there has been a pattern of Ukrainian terror attacks on Russian targets, Daria Dugina, the Nord Stream terror attack is something that the US is pinning directly on Ukraine, on sort of a secret operation overseen by Valery Zaluzhny, the former chief of staff, without Zelensky's knowledge. There have been deliberate attacks on civilian targets that are increasing from the Ukrainian military, the Belgorod Christmas attack, for example. And so, but the tactics, the strategy might be there. Ukraine's losing on the battlefield. It's getting more asymmetric. It is resorting to terror. Kit Clarenberg did turn up documents where military intelligence officials, British military intelligence officials, were advising Ukraine on establishing a partisan terror army to attack Russian targets. However, the tactics are different. These were not ISIS tactics. Ukraine has not to this point sent gunmen to just randomly mow down people in theaters. So yeah, there's that. Victoria Nuland, would she preview a terrorist attack like this? Did she have direct knowledge? I have no idea. She did say she was happy to see the Nord Stream pipeline as a heap of scraps at the bottom of the Black Sea floor. So I mean,
because they did that, because the U.S. did that, and she's happy to broadcast that, because that's a covert operation. It's not a, like a massacre of civilians like this attack in the theater. It makes sense to me she would brag about that. It doesn't make sense to me she'd brag about or preview a terrorist attack on a theater, which is very different than attacking Nord Stream.
Okay, let's listen to John Kirby. The U.S. did have a warning, some kind of warning for Americans in Moscow. Let's listen to John.
Noticed all Americans in Moscow to avoid any large gathering, concerts, obviously shopping malls, anything like that, just for their own safety. They should stay put where they are and stay plugged into the State Department for any additional updates and information.
The U.S. have prior knowledge of this attack in Moscow, given that the U.S. Embassy had issued warning beforehand?
I'm not aware of any advanced knowledge that we had of this terrible attack. Put out a note.
So, I mean, that was unusual. What's his name? I'm forgetting his name. He was on Fareed Zakaria yesterday. He's one of these Kremlinologists, and the name isn't coming to me, but he basically said the U.S. really like nailed it and showed its intelligence prowess by warning Americans in advance that something was coming in Moscow. But then Kirby denies any advanced knowledge. The Russian government is complaining that the U.S. didn't share their intelligence with them. But this sort of looked like a signals blinking red type scenario. I don't know what to think about that U.S. warning, but it's another reason why people are getting conspiratorial.
I understand. It makes sense to me that the U.S. would cynically exploit this attack and pretend as if they shared intelligence with Russia, which I totally doubt they did, because U.S. has said its aim is to weaken Russia. So it makes sense to me that they wouldn't actually be cooperating on stuff like this because relations are so low. But it also makes sense to me, though. I don't think it's a contradiction. Like they probably do pick up stuff, rumblings of stuff like this. They probably do have assets in groups like ISIS-K or ISIS-K directly, and they pick up warnings of this. But it doesn't mean to me that they're actually involved and complicit. It just doesn't make sense to me. But again, a lot of this is, your intuition and your biases. And I understand, as you said, I understand why people are skeptical, and it's important. You can't put anything past these people. They're the most cynical, diabolical people in the world. So I get it. But anyway, for the reasons I laid out, it's not the view I take, but I understand why people think that the U.S. is directly involved in this.
Well, yeah, I mean, there has to be, I think we're going to be learning a lot more in the coming years. The same way that we learned about Operation Gladio. But again, there's no hard evidence. And if anything, I would think it would be the British and not the U.S. They've just proven themselves to be much more dastardly and ruthless when it comes to Russia than even the U.S. But let's look at the interrogation of one of those citizen of Tajikistan. These are guys who are like, one of them was a hairdresser. Another one, three of them were fathers. These were not like hardcore killers based on their background, who were like contract killers. And this guy, this is in Russia, and he's basically saying he can speak Russian. Anyway, here's a transcript of what he's saying. And he's basically saying, he's saying, I shot them. Who? On whose instructions? People. Why? For the money. For how much money? About 500,000. 500,000 of what? 500,000 rubles. Who did you receive it from? I haven't received it. I received half of it. Where did you get it? Did you transfer it to the card? I threw it away. I threw away the clothes. So he doesn't have the card that the money's on, which makes it hard to track. Who are they? He says, I don't know. They wrote me by telegram without a first name, without a last name, without anything. Did you look for them yourself or did they find you? They wrote to me. And why did they write you specifically? Did they tell you to kill people? And he's saying that he went to follow a preacher, kind of like sort of like one of these takfiri, like jihadist preachers on Telegram. And then he was recruited there. He studied at Telegram. I listened to the preacher there. His assistant wrote to me. When did he write to you? About a month ago. I just said hello first. Then he offered me money and I agreed. What did you suggest? I offered to do things for money, like murders. And then they specifically asked me to kill people. Which ones? It doesn't matter. Just go in and kill. Yes. Okay. So assuming that's the case, I mean, this is someone who is very low IQ, very desperate for money, willing to kill, who's like looking for some kind of meaning within some kind of, I don't know what ISIS is, but it's certainly some extremist preacher. And anyone can recruit you through a Telegram group and offer you money to go do that if you're willing to do it. It really reminded me of what would be now an obscure film to most of our viewers and listeners. It's a 1977 film called Telephone. I watched it last night just to kind of like remind me. It's like Hollywood in the 70s at its best. It's got Charles Bronson as a KGB agent, soundtrack by Lalo Schifrin. And it's a Cold War thriller about a extreme, like a hardcore faction within the KGB that wants to stop détente between the US, which has a liberal president, and a Soviet Union that wants to come in from the cold. And what they do is they recruit people in the US by telephone, by entrancing them into carrying out terror attacks inside the US. And the KGB teams up with the CIA to stop this telephone programming terror ring that's attacking targets inside the US. And then, I mean, I called this live stream Program to Kill, after the book Program to Kill: The Politics of Serial Murder by David McGowan, which is about how many serial killers or mass killers like Whitey Bulger had actually participated in programs like MK Ultra. Whitey Bulger was an MK Ultra victim who had been dosed on LSD over 50 times. Serious brain damage. So what's going on here is someone has programmed these guys to carry out mass murder and entice them with money through Telegram. They're basically rent-a-terrorists. And you had this phenomenon also in Iran during the Mahsa Amini Women Life Freedom protests, where there would be young men who would go out. One guy went out and stabbed a bunch of Basij volunteers in the streets. And then he apologized before being executed and said he had just been recruited through Telegram, and kind of like didn't know what he was doing, sort of caught up in the moment. So I think that's the question, is who's programming these characters. And yeah, Aaron, it could be ISIS-K, but it could also just be anyone who wants to rent a terrorist to do some damage to Russia. And ISIS historically has had relationships with Western intelligence. We know that. So I'm not saying put two and two together and it's definitely the case that the MI6 did this, but people are asking questions for a reason. I mean, you look at who the head of ISIS-K, or I mean, there's no head of ISIS-K, but like founder. His license to deal, this is Seth Harp, his license to deal weapons. Okay, this is all just scrubbed from Wikipedia because Seth Harp brought it up. But he was a contractor at Bagram who he worked for Rashid Dostum, who was a CIA proxy in Afghanistan. And then he worked for Amrullah Saleh, who was like the CIA's man in Afghanistan. Shahab al-Muhajir. I don't know if that's his nickname or real name. It says it right there. This has all been removed from Wikipedia. He worked as a subcontractor of a security company and frequented Bagram airfield maintained by the US. He was a special guest of then first vice presidents Abdul Rashid Dostum and Amrullah Saleh, and had a license to transfer weapons. So, I mean, who is ISIS-K? And of course, we can blame the US for destabilizing Afghanistan to create the void for ISIS-K in the first place.
Same with Iraq and Syria. And that's how I view it. To me, it's the more plausible view for me is it's a case of blowback. The US goes into these places to destabilize them and to undermine their geopolitical enemies, and to end up empowering people like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, as was the case in Syria and Iraq. And there ends up being blowback in the same way that, ISIS-K took responsibility for the suicide bombing at the Kabul airport as the U.S. was withdrawing. Was that a case of the U.S. working with ISIS-K and like a false flag attack on itself, or was that a case of just blowback where that's the consequence of the U.S. empowering these people? It ends up hurting everybody, including the U.S. So that's how I view these things. We shouldn't be involved in these foreign places and empowering sectarian death squads, whether it's in Syria, Afghanistan, or Iraq. And when you do that, you're going to have blowback.
Yeah. And I mean, ISIS, there was a point when they were attacking targets in the West, the Bataclan Theater, for example. But for the most part, they've been attacking enemies of the U.S., particularly, or designated and enemies designated by the U.S., particularly Syria. And here's one point where they actually apologized to Israel. ISIS fighters regret attacking Israel and have apologized, former defense minister says. Fighters loyal to the Islamic militant state, this is 2017, have apologized for launching an attack on Israeli forces last year in the occupied Golan Heights region, according to Israel's former defense minister, Moshe Ya'alon. And that was, I mean, ISIS was operating in the Golan Heights throughout the Syria dirty war. And Moshe Ya'alon is notorious for saying many times that he preferred ISIS and Al-Qaeda to be in the Golan than the Syrian Arab Army or the Syrian government, which is actually hostile to Israel, or Hezbollah. So Israel was actually supplying them with, they were providing them with some supplies and logistics to kind of create this buffer zone. So what were they? And then, of course, we have the famous comments by John Kerry during the Syria proxy war. This is a tweet by Aaron Mate. Back when he had Blinken's job, John Kerry explained that the Obama-Biden administration sat back and watched as ISIS advanced to possibly take over Damascus.
The reason Russia came in is because ISIL was getting stronger. Daesh was threatening the possibility of going to Damascus and so forth. And that's why Russia came in, because they didn't want a Daesh government. And they supported Assad. And we know that this was growing. We were watching. We saw that Daesh was growing in strength. And we thought Assad was threatened. We thought, however, we could probably manage, that Assad might then negotiate. Instead of negotiating, you got Assad. You got Putin to support him. The reason.
So that's, I think he's climate czar now, John Kerry.
Yeah. It's an amazing clip. He's admitting that the U.S. was using ISIS as a tool for regime change in Syria. We were watching as they were going, and we thought we could manage that, and we thought that would compel Assad to negotiate his way out of power and allow us to install someone who we liked in Syria. He admitted it right there. And then Russia came in because they didn't want an ISIS government. Imagine that. Imagine not wanting to see Syria ruled by ISIS. So that's why Russia came in. And that's why I think it makes sense for ISIS to want to take revenge on Russia.
So you can clearly see that ISIS has been useful to the United States, the UK, and Israel. And that's why a lot of people are forming certain conclusions about what happened at Crocus City Hall after Putin's landslide election. The Russian government is pinning it on Ukraine, or at least pivoting in that direction. They're pointing to the fact that this terror squad apparently attempted to escape towards the Bryansk region on the Ukrainian border. The more will come out, but I think it's important to at least address the history of ISIS here and understand why certain perspectives are forming. And of course, then on the Ukrainian side, they're trying to claim that this is a Russian false flag, that Russia would actually allow for the slaughter of so many of their citizens in order to be able to escalate in Ukraine and to win world sympathy for whatever they're going to do next in Ukraine as the Ukrainian military basically folds on the battlefield. And that seems to be absurd.
Of course. Nick Kristof of the New York Times said the same thing, that that was his first reaction. This was a Russian false flag. And it's just so funny. When we document false flags in Syria, when there's so much evidence of sectarian death squads carrying out false flags, whether it's actual chemical attacks, as was the case in Ghouta in 2013, August 2013, or staged chemical attacks, as was the case in Duma in April 2018, we get accused of being conspiracy theorists. But when it's Russia being accused of carrying out a false flag, then everything is totally fine. And but this argument from Russia that these guys were fleeing towards Ukraine, to me, that just doesn't show anything. The fact is they're going in the direction of Ukraine doesn't even mean they're trying to go into Ukraine. If they were trying to go into Ukraine, why wouldn't they try to flee into a country that's at war with the government they just attacked? And also, they could have been trying to go into Belarus, for all I know, because I believe that's also in that region as well. So the fact they're apprehended in the direction of the Ukraine border, just to me, is not very significant.
We'll keep following this. And until then, I advise everyone to watch Telephone. It's free online at Daily Motion, actually. And I'll leave you with the words of Robert Frost. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. Miles to go before I sleep. That's from someone of a generation who actually probably saw that film. That's the code language that was read by a KGB officer to various Americans to compel them to carry out terror attacks. We got to move on unless there's anything you want to add.
No, do you want to cover what's happening now at Al-Shifa? Israel once again attacking it?
Yeah. Well, you have Israel's back at Al-Shifa Hospital. Al-Shifa Hospital is a major complex in the heart of Gaza City. Israel attacked it as one of its main attack points back in, I believe, November 2023, claimed that Hamas maintained a command and control center underneath the hospital. It failed to prove that. It found one tunnel that Israel had actually built years before that was adjacent to the hospital and used the opportunity to put the hospital partially out of service. The north has been destroyed. The Al Rimal neighborhood around Al-Shifa has been destroyed by Israeli bombing. Much of the population has been ethnically cleansed and pushed south to Rafah. But some 300, 400,000 people remain in northern Gaza. And Al-Shifa has managed to kind of trudge along, sort of begin to reconstitute itself. And now Israel's back there claiming, once again, it's a Hamas command and control center, and it's carrying out heinous atrocities. This is footage of a group of French Israeli soldiers, so basically French foreign fighters, assaulting and abusing Palestinian men around Al-Shifa Hospital.
T'as vu ces enculés, mon neveu? Ces fils de putain? Allez, descends, fils de pute. Sur les pierres. Ah, enculé de ta mère.
Sur les pierres.
Fils de putain, là, regarde, il s'est pissé dessus. Regarde, je vais te montrer son dos, tu vas rigoler. Regarde. Ils l'ont torturé. On va le faire parler. T'as vu son dos? Ah, fils de putain.
Qu'est-ce que tu fais en Palestine, fasciste? What are you doing there? Anyway, yeah, we're seeing so many atrocities. The blowing up of the surgical center at Al-Shifa. We're hearing about field executions. These are Israeli soldiers. Actually, they're assaulting hospitals across the north. They've assaulted Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital. This is at the Indonesian hospital. Again, Israeli soldiers sort of playing doctor with medical garb they've stolen. Sort of a mixture of Joseph Mengele and like Jewish frat douches from any Ivy League college. Horrible stuff. But what's really going on here? Here's Israel's sort of justification for what they're doing at Al-Shifa Hospital. Now, we know that Israel's trying to put these hospitals and keep these hospitals out of service because they're trying to destroy any center of life. As Aaron mentioned earlier, Israel's preventing UNRWA from making aid deliveries to the north. They've established what's called the Netzarim corridor between the north of Gaza and the central area of Deir al-Balah, leading down to the south towards Khan Yunis. And that's going to be like a 2-kilometer wide tank corridor to prevent anyone from the north from reaching the south. And they want to cut the north off completely and turn it into this kind of collaborator territory where UNRWA can't operate, where there's no Hamas. And they're claiming that they've arrested all these top Hamas agents and carried out this heroic operation around Shifa. And they've produced this collage that shows 358 confirmed terror operatives and more than 650 suspects from Hamas detained. Basically, they can just, generate this image by AI or pull up the population registry, which is in their computer systems of the entire Gaza Strip, and generate this very easily. We have no idea who they are, who they're affiliated with, whether they're Hamas. We've seen so many of these mass detentions where people would online recognize one of their neighbors and say, oh yeah, he's a doctor. Oh yeah, I went to college with him. He's just like my friend. They have nothing to do with any militant activity. However, there is a certain truth there, which is that battles are raging around the Al-Shifa area. You can go on to the Telegram channels that broadcast footage filmed by the Al-Qassam brigades and Sarai al-Quds of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and they'll show them hitting Israeli tanks with tandem rockets, taking on Israeli soldiers with machine guns. There is fighting there. So if we are to accept the Israeli official narrative about what's happening at Al-Shifa Hospital, that's still terrible for Israel. As I pointed out earlier, they're trying to go into Rafah. They say that there are 2 more battalions that they need to take out, or brigades that they need to take out of Al-Qassam to finish the job, and that they're in Rafah. But yet they're still fighting in the north. And 2 months ago or more, Israel pulled out the Golani and Givati brigades from northern Gaza. And they're sort of they claimed an operational hold. They claimed a victory in Shujaiya, which is where they suffered their worst losses in 2014. And now they're back. And so it just shows that Israel, after 5 months, cannot eradicate Hamas and will not eradicate Hamas. And as long as it stays there, it will be in an endless war, a permanent insurgency in which it's just bled all political support around the world and is carrying out the most heinous atrocities imaginable. How much longer can they keep going before they admit that their objective has failed and their other objectives failed? They're not getting any hostages out. One just died of starvation, because everyone's dying of starvation. Not everyone, but so basically, in a nutshell, Israel's presence at Al-Shifa Hospital again is a token of defeat.
And let's remember, the Biden administration laid the groundwork for this back in November, when, just as Israel was assaulting Al-Shifa, John Kirby came out and said that the U.S. has its own intelligence of Hamas command and control there at Al-Shifa. They were basically co-signing Israel's assault on Al-Shifa Hospital. And then, of course, there was no such command and control whatsoever. And now this recently came out. Chris Van Hollen, again, one of the few Democratic senators who's critical of Israel, he comes out with this. He reveals that at the time, he got briefings that didn't show evidence of what the U.S. was saying, and that actually the evidence was undermined by what the U.S. was publicly saying. This is from the Washington Post. Chris Van Hollen, who had received a classified briefing about the U.S. intelligence on Al-Shifa, said there were important and subtle differences between what Biden officials were saying publicly and what the intelligence actually showed. I did find there was some I did find there to be some disconnect between the administration's public statements and the classified briefings about Al-Shifa, Chris Van Hollen said. And that's great. And, you know, at the time, anybody with their eyes open pointed out that the administration was lying. But again, for Chris Van Hollen, why didn't you say this at the time? If you were being told something differently in private from what the administration was saying publicly about a Hamas command center at Al-Shifa, why didn't you say that? Why are you only saying this now, months after the fact, and after Israel's attacking Shifa now for, you know, the upteenth time after the initial assault in November? It's just like, this is the best we can do with Democrats, is after the fact, they'll come out and say, oh yeah, we were being lied to. Why not say it at the time?
Yeah, it was obvious. I mean, my whole, like, it's just obvious at the time when an Israeli official is speaking words or in public or their mouth is open that they're lying, that they are just urinating on our heads and telling us that it's raining. That's what they do. So, but the senators are such cowards. They all know what Israel's doing is not just heinous, but it's even counterproductive to whatever Israeli interests are. And yet none of them are willing to say anything because of the sheer power of the Israel lobby. Why else would Chris Van Hollen vote against UNRWA, funding UNRWA, after all he knows and has said?
Yeah.
Something else has really fascinating has come out of the Al-Shifa siege by Israel, which has left hundreds dead. And we've heard, if you look at like Euromed, Human Rights Monitor reports, witness after witness describing field executions, people who live near the hospital having their homes raided, just being shot on sight, having their homes burned and being told to march north. Israel wants to cleanse the whole area. But here's the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Ambassador David Saranga, the social networks have become a strategic threat to Israel. Let me be precise. The combination of the industry of lies and social media networks has long since become a strategic threat to Western democracies. Here's an example of the poison we're dealing with on social media. There are over 500,000 views of a tweet from last night which accuses IDF soldiers of raping a pregnant woman in Shifa Hospital. Furthermore, the terminology used in this blood libel is an exact parallel to the crimes committed by Hamas on October 7th. They took her in front of her husband and children, raped her, and ordered the men not to close their eyes or they would shoot them. It is clear this is a fake account. And then they, give evidence to debunk this account. The irony. I mean, this is almost as ironic as Israel having a Holocaust museum on its soil while it's carrying out a Holocaust in real life just a few miles away. They concocted one of the biggest hoaxes of the war. They being not just the Israeli government, but Zaka, which is aligned with the Israeli Foreign Ministry, works closely with the Foreign Ministry, claiming that Hamas cut a fetus from a pregnant woman on October 7th, claiming systematic rape carried out with orders to commit gang rape. We've been through this 100 times on this live stream. Now Israel is fighting these same allegations on its official foreign ministry account. They're freaking out. And the irony cannot be overstated. And they totally deserve this. They totally deserve this. I don't know if it's true that a pregnant woman was raped there or not. I think it's very credible that field executions were carried out because they've been doing that throughout the entire war with like no accountability. But now the tables have turned. Israel is in such a reduced marginalized position diplomatically after 5 months of genocide that it is fighting rape allegations by its own soldiers.
Yeah, there was just an article in the Jerusalem Post saying that a U.S. official, it was an Israeli newspaper, a
Yeah.
U.S. official has accused Israel of carrying out systemic sexual violence. Someone from the State Department. I haven't seen more on that, but it's just interesting. You compare the reaction. So this is a U.S. official now privately making this allegation. Where's Hillary Clinton and Linda Thomas Greenfield coming out to condemn Israel and to call anyone who dares question this allegation as rape denialists, right? As was the case with the Hamas fabrications. In the case of Israel being accused of this, it's a lot more plausible. They're an occupying army, and there's a history of them committing sexual violence. It's documented.
Yeah. So again, I don't know if it's true, but this I was looking for the Jerusalem Post article.
I'll find it.
It's going around. Basically, this is the person with the Israel-Palestine portfolio in the State Department who's making this allegation. And the Israelis leaked it to the Jerusalem Post in order to embarrass the Biden administration because they thought this would hurt the Biden administration, but it's boomeranged. And now people who are anti-genocide, anti-Israeli, anti-Gaza genocide are sharing this article as evidence that, or at least to indicate that the Biden administration has evidence that Israel's committing sexual violence in Gaza. Now, I've said before, sexual violence in this conflict is more rare than in other wars, where, for example, you might have like one army occupying a village of people that's like culturally similar, like Germany occupying a French village, for example, or like two Slavic armies fighting each other. The cultural differences are so extreme that both sides have such they're so polarized, and Israeli soldiers are able to go home to their girlfriends or go back to base and get sexual services provided to them pretty quickly. They just drive 15 minutes back. That's why sexual violence is so prevalent within the Israeli military, to the point where plurality of female soldiers have reported some form of sexual harassment. And since October 7th, there's been a plague in Israeli society being reported in Hebrew media of women being killed in domestic violence, particularly in the homes of Israeli reservists who served in Gaza. So it's hard to say what's happening here, but I mean, this is just, these are just like more body blows to the hoax that Israel tried to spin, because they've created this, and they've set the stage for allegations to be made against them that turn the tables.
Yeah, it's just a lot more plausible to me that the occupying army would carry out sexual violence. They're the occupier, and that's what occupiers generally do. Palestinian militants engaged in a one-day guerrilla operation. I just don't think that's even if you look past all, Islam and all the edicts against sexual violence that Islam has and Hamas members have, even if you look past that, just like the timing, it never made sense to me that there'd be time for people to commit all these horrific acts of sexual violence. But an occupying army that's obsessed with wearing women's lingerie in the homes that they break into and steal. I mean, to me, that's just a lot more plausible that Israel would be guilty of it.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing's clear: Israel is a sick society.
Yes.
I mean, it is just comprehensively consumed in deep genocidal pathology at this point. And the sickness emanates from Zionism, and it was on full display during Purim, which is our version of Halloween. And it's supposed to have kind of a liberationist theme to it. It's a biblical tale of, Jews escaping from their persecutors. But in Israel, it's playing out as a celebration of Jews as persecutors. This is one family's costume. They're holding a sign that says Gaza Booby, which is the name of a song by singer Moshe Corsia. Corsia served as an army commander in Gaza, and when he came back home, released this nationalistic song called Gaza Booby about his return to his beloved country. The song includes, of course, a mention of the, quote, sons of Amalek, Amalek being the biblical tribe slaughtered by God in in the book of Deuteronomy because they came after the Hebrews. And look at this family. I mean, this is like you get your Christmas cards from your normie friends, and they're all wearing like Ned Flanders, like Christmas sweaters in a winter setting, like, or you Hanukkah cards, whatever, holiday cards. This is an Israeli Purim card, just mocking Gaza genocide. So, I mean, whatever happened at Al-Shifa Hospital, I really feel for the people there because they're besieged by imported sociopaths from one of the sickest societies that human civilization has ever witnessed. And it's painful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's painful when you are Jewish and these are the holidays you were raised on, and you just see these genocidal zombies taking it and turning it into a festival of Nazism.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't have any schmooly videos like teed up. Like you can go see him. Like I don't feel he's not an influential person now. He used to be, but he's made himself sort of relevant through the Twitter algorithm by humiliating himself and having a manic episode. But what he's actually doing in real terms, in concrete terms, is he is actually an engine of anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
And I said a few weeks ago, maybe you could pull up one of his videos, but he is a Jewish stereotype lifted from the imagination of Julius Streicher or Joseph Goebbels. Like he realizes the worst critique of Jews in the minds of anti-Semites. And he's gone so far that on Purim, he actually dressed up as what he called a Candace Owens Jew in order to dramatize anti-Semitism. But he actually just, the only reason that the joke works is because he already was an anti-Semitic stereotype. And if someone doesn't shut Shmuley down, anti-Semitism is going to continue to go up. Like if the ADL would just direct its entire operations to carrying out like some rendition of Shmuley and disappearing him to a black site somewhere, that it would reduce anti-Semitism. But then the ADL would go out of business, so they don't want to do that.
Here he is dressed up for Purim. I don't even like. I think he's actually dressed up as.
And he's drinking Christian blood and he's committing child abuse.
He's actually dressed up, I believe, as like a Candace Owens Jew, which means someone who is like, in his view, on the side of Hamas. That's his costume. And I mean, do we need to listen to him, or is this visual enough?
No, this is enough. And I mean, it really troubles me. I actually see anti-Semitism rising. Like I can feel it. And it's a response to this. And it's a response to Israeli soldiers putting giant menorahs in the center of areas they've destroyed, where they've carried out mass slaughter, where they're representing the symbols of our faith community as swastikas before the entire world. How did they expect people to react? And they're doing it deliberately because anti-Semitism justifies the whole, the idea of Zionism, which is that there's no place for Jews anywhere else in the world except Israel. We are so beset with anti-Semitism that we must flock to Israel. So they want anti-Semitism to rise. They are the engine of anti-Semitism. And it's so irresponsible and so dangerous. And then you have on the other side, Franklin Foer, the author of like this absurdly hagiographical book about Joe Biden, and a completely fake, discredited piece about how Trump was using Alpha Bank servers. on the cover of the Atlantic magazine, which is edited by a former Israeli prison guard, Jeffrey Goldberg. And he claims that the golden age of American Judaism is over, that anti-Semitism is rising. I agree with him that there is anti-Semitism out there, but he won't point the finger where it belongs, which is at the Israeli genocide machine and its supporters. And they're doing it deliberately. And also, if the golden age of American Judaism was really over, why hasn't he faced any professional consequence for publishing this fake article on Trump's Alpha Bank server? I mean, he's still living in total privilege 100%. Under the watch of Jeffrey Goldberg's basically an Israel lobbyist.
You've never seen, at least that I can remember, a situation where the people who are perpetrating such evils are simultaneously claiming to be the victims.
Yeah.
And not drawing any connection between the two. No reflection on what behavior they're supporting, what actions they're supporting might contribute to any sort of animosity they might face. And listen, rather than repeat, I just endorse everything you said, Max, and it's just so shameful right now to see Jews, not just supporting a genocide, but then acting as the victims. It's such a shameful moment. It makes me understand what it must be like to be, German and feeling the shame of the Nazi genocide. It's really the same thing.
Yeah. We'll have to become like Philo-Palestinian or something, like they became Philo-Semitic. But yeah, here's his piece. Anti-Semitism on the right and the left threatens to end an unprecedented period of safety and prosperity for Jewish Americans and demolish the liberal order they helped establish, Franklin Foer writes. No, you know what threatens it is you and exactly. Zionists. Take responsibility.
Exactly.
And collect Shmuley and put him in a black site somewhere. Put him in a tunnel and never let him out.
Yeah.
Put him in the Chabad tunnels and never let him out. He can live off of urine soaked mattresses down there. But this is, take responsibility for yourself. I'm sick of it. I mean, it's so disgusting that this is on the cover of the Atlantic. Sorry, this is sort of unplanned, but had to get it off my chest. I know you feel the same. We've got like a very eager Hekmat Aboukhater in the studio, and I see he's like wearing a suit. He's really ready for his job interview. And Jeremy Loffredo is back there too. We still have time for both of them. I thought maybe we could spend 5 minutes on one more item that I wanted to cover, which is related to the famine in Gaza. And this is just obscene. We're going to publish a piece on this. Obscene and bizarre. Okay. Israel's blocking the United Nations Relief Works Agency from bringing aid into northern Gaza. This is the main agency which has kept Palestinian refugees alive and very well educated in the Gaza Strip since about 1950. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so at the same time, the Israeli military is coordinating and collaborating with Jose Andres, Spanish celebrity chef and State Department asset, to bring aid, a giant ship of 200 tons of aid or something, into northern Gaza. And let's just watch their promotional video.
Gaza is in need of more food and more ways to get food to the people.
We're out here in Cyprus. We are palletizing all these to be shortly loaded onto one of our boats that we've secured through the UAE.
Loaded with 200 tons of food aid for the people of Gaza. Today, and in a historic moment, this boat is going to arrive in the next few days.
I am in northern Gaza. We've got to build a pier, some way of unloading this food from the incoming boat. The boat actually is supposed to get to its rendezvous points late tonight. We're seeing if we can't get this finished up today and unload the cargo early tomorrow morning. Lots of challenges across the board. An amazing, amazing Palestinian team just pushing, working through the night.
We hope that this is going to be the first of many boats going to Gaza today.
Things are looking okay. We're going to work all day today through the night and see later this evening as to whether or not we can receive the boat early tomorrow morning or Saturday morning.
First ship that's come to Gaza.
Where did that
100 tons
dock come from?
of food. We had to build this jetty to do so out of rubble. The head contractor, his houses are right up here. Both those houses were bombed, and he actually went and collected the rubble from both of his homes to help build this jetty to help bring more food.
What? So they built a dock. They're displacing UNRWA, and they're building the dock out of destroyed Palestinian homes stolen from their owners, which, for all we know, contain genocidal biowaste of people's bodies who are buried under the rubble. I mean, and the food isn't going to feed anyone. And the Israeli military is letting them in, letting them set up kitchens around northern Gaza, but not allowing the UN to be there. And Jose Andres, I mean, he's a huge cheerleader for the Ukraine proxy war. On the front lines there and of lobbying for aid. I was behind him at the big DIA USAID rollout event. He was sitting right in front of me. He's a State Department culinary ambassador. And after October 7th, he brought World Central Kitchen into Israel to serve food to Israeli soldiers and Israeli citizens. And there was a Spanish minister, the minister of cultural affairs, who was condemning Israel and calling for a ceasefire. Iona Belora, I believe her name is. He personally attacked her and told her to shut up in October. Now he's calling for a ceasefire and saying this is the only way they can get aid in. But he's participating with the Israeli military in a program to pacify northern Gaza, and it's not being called out, with using the rubble of Palestinian homes. I've never seen anything like that before. Stealing people's property to build a dock without their permission. It's pretty shocking.
There's nothing they won't exploit, including food aid, just as a cynical stunt. And as you pointed out, I mean, this whole idea of a port off of Gaza, that was originally an Israeli idea. And it seems to me as if this sort of plays into that, along with the so-called pier that Biden is building. But yeah, when you have someone like Jose Andres, who, yes, he is calling for a ceasefire now, but he's also defended the Biden administration throughout all of this. He's never forcefully criticized them. And you couple that with everything's done about Ukraine, totally on board with Ukraine proxy war. It's so shady.
No, I mean, he's like pals with Biden, and he was hanging out with Pelosi before the State of the Union. He's completely linked at the hip, joined at the hip with the Biden administration. So whatever's happening here needs to be watched. I think what we're going to see in the coming weeks is the sinister side of the humanitarian aid industry and the NGOification of northern Gaza as Israel seeks to displace the cost of genocide onto the, quote, international community, which is essentially the collective West and the United Arab Emirates, like the monarchies that bow down before them. So, and then you have Samantha Power kind of throwing up her hands and saying, we're powerless to get the aid in. Jose Andres really is exposed in Spain, and the Spanish left understands who he is, but it's time Americans start understanding the insidious, sinister role he's playing in this genocide. With that, we've got two special guests backstage who are contributors to the Grayzone, and I see Hekmat's ready to go. I don't see Jeremy, but Jeremy, if you could raise your hand or whatever, just show us you're there. Okay, you're there. So we're going to have Hekmat on first to talk about the anti-Syrian lobbying trip that he infiltrated as a journalist on Capitol Hill. And then we're going to bring in Jeremy, who has produced one of the most powerful pieces exposing the true face of genocidal Jewish Israeli society as he embedded himself within the aid blockade, blocking aid to Gaza, this grassroots aid blockade. So I don't know.
Both these guys have embedded themselves with some really evil people. I think that's the theme throughout both their appearances. So let's bring Hekmat in first. Welcome, Hekmat.
Hey guys, good to see you again. And as you can see, Max, I lost the suit.
Yeah,
so, it's no longer an interview.
I just don't want to be I don't want to be outdone here.
Yeah, appreciate it. No worries. Yeah, so as you just mentioned, Aaron, I truly embedded with the unfortunate types of the Syrian American community in Washington that live and feed off of the Washington Warhawk state. And they put out their agenda. They were clearly stating that they wanted 4 legislative asks. They want to extend the Caesar sanctions by 8 years. And as you all have reported, and I hope by now that the Grayzone audience is well and familiar with what the Caesar sanctions are and what they do and what they've caused, what suffering they've caused in Syria. In the majority of Syria that is inhabited by the majority of Syrians, 12 million plus in the area controlled under the Syrian regime. So in the article, I detail exactly what their legislative asks are and how they go about pushing these legislative asks.
Well, let's just kind of step back a little bit. You are Syrian. You were raised in Syria. You have seen the effects of these sanctions and the dirty war firsthand. You know people who've suffered from the violence of the armed opposition, and you went on this lobbying trip led by other Syrians who want to commit regime change.
So I would just correct one thing. It wasn't necessarily led by the ACS, which is the American Coalition for Syria. It was prompted by something that Mohammed Ala Ghanem, one of the main heads of this lobby, stated in the article, and I quote him, the main impetus for this advocacy day, quote unquote, is because the Caesar sanctions were about to expire. They were set to expire at the end of 2024, and someone within Capitol Hill messaged Ghanem or talked to Ghanem. That's what he stated in the leaked audio that I provided, that it would be a shame, quote unquote, to lose the leverage that we have on Syria if these sanctions were to expire without them being extended. So they put on this entire ruse of caring about Captagon, which is poor man's cocaine and like rich man's Adderall. And they put on this entire ruse of caring about the geopolitics and not wanting to escalate in the region, etc., etc. But deep within S-2935, which is this newest bill, the Assad anti-normalization bill, is this one line that states that the extension of the Caesar will go for 8 more years. And as you said, I am a Syrian. I lived in Syria all of my life up until 2015, and I lived through I was in Aleppo. I lived through the siege of Aleppo. I saw a lot of the suffering that we went through as Syrians living in the city. Family members were killed in Damascus. We had friends that I grew up playing basketball with, 2 brothers, Armenian guys, and they both were killed by a shrapnel from a gas cylinder that fell on their house. And a lot of suffering that we witnessed that was not voiced in any way in these Capitol Hill conversations. In these conversations, someone like Ala Ghanem, who's like a Harvard MBA or Harvard graduate and SIPA School for Columbia graduate as well, would come in and would start speaking in an eloquent speech about the suffering, the one-sided suffering of the Syrian people that he claims to represent. And no one on the other side, they just nod along and they agree with him completely. And no one from our side is allowed to voice any opposition to this one-sided narrative. Our embassy is shuttered in Washington since 2014, as you guys know. And we don't have any institutional backing in the United States to push forward a narrative that counters what they're trying to push.
Yeah,
your side. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Side, Hekmat, just to be clear, your side is the side that represents most Syrians because most Syrians live in territory controlled by the government.
Yeah,
they have no voice whatsoever. They're subject to these brutal sanctions, which was the topic of discussion here on Capitol Hill, which these people just want to extend behind closed doors.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, a point that is important to make is regardless of people's political positions, the 12 million that I keep quoting under the control of the Syrian government in the major cities of Aleppo, Hama, Homs, Latakia, Tartus, and Damascus, regardless of their political views, why would they ever want the sanctions to be extended when they know exactly what the immiseration that they're suffering? They know exactly how their kids are growing up with stunted growth, and they know that they're an insane number of women who are going through pregnancies while anemic. And why would they ever want to extend that? And why would these people push this narrative that they're representing the entirety of the Syrian people with no opposition, while expecting no opposition, is what eludes me.
So, Hekmat, you captured some audio by, this is Wael Al-Zayat, who's one of the leaders of this anti-Syria lobby, someone who's adjacent to Israel and close in part of the U.S. foreign policy establishment. This is some damning audio that you got as they lobbied for more starvation sanctions for Syria to basically, so let's take a listen.
So here he is in this first clip, basically to inflate his clout. Here he is pretending that he was a major drive behind the uncommitted campaign against Joe Biden over his support for the genocide. When in real life, actually, this guy was vouching for Joe Biden's so-called empathy toward Palestinians. But this is what he said. This is in a recorded audio that Hekmat got while being there in these meetings.
My organization engages actually very happy with the stances on the Israel aid issue.
Okay. Happier than with Biden then?
Hmm?
Happier than with Biden?
We're very concerned about the humanitarian situation, about the regional escalation, and the electoral consequences, especially what we're seeing with the uncommitted campaigns, which my organization is.
He's claiming my organization is behind in Michigan and Minnesota, the uncommitted stances.
Right.
As an organization that's supported the administration. That's preposterous. All right, that is preposterous.
So he's lying. He's lying because they were not behind uncommitted at all. That was somebody with the Justice Democrats. I forgot his name, but he spearheaded that. Had nothing to do with Engage. And in real life, what Wael was doing was actually vouching for Biden. So here he is after a meeting with Biden in October. He said he recognized there are many. He's talking about Biden. He recognized there have been many missteps on the rhetoric. He listened. He did show empathy, and he promised to do better, particularly on humanizing Palestinians. Right. So that is Wael vouching for Biden's so-called empathy toward Palestinians. And now, as he goes toward Capitol Hill to try to lobby for starvation sanctions on Syria, he's pretending as if he was behind the uncommitted campaign. Incredibly cynical. And there's more, because then he goes on to basically try to trade off the Gaza genocide for support for the northern part of Syria, like the northern province of Idlib, which is controlled by Al-Qaeda. And he's basically trying to say, hey, if you can promise some support for this Al-Qaeda controlled province, which is the only rebel controlled province in Syria, then we can sell that to our community as a good story. So this is that clip.
Yeah, and
let's
just to add one more thing go ahead, Aaron.
Well, let's hear the clip and then we just
need to start showing that our government is paying attention, doing some creative work, long-term work, and here I'm from my engaged voter mobilization. I need to give a story to my voters to say you're upset with the administration of Gaza, you're upset about upset about all these disappointments. Guess what? They're pumping 50 million into the school sector in the north. We just need to start showing that our government paying attention.
Yeah. So basically, what he's saying is, Arab Americans are mad about Yemen. They're mad about Gaza. But if you just dump some money into Idlib, which is basically a NATO protectorate cutout in Syria, where like the former leaders of Al-Qaeda in Syria are taking sanctuary, then they'll just forgive you for Gaza and Yemen. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and the funniest thing is that people forget where Baghdadi was killed eventually.
Yeah.
Where he was droned. It was in Idlib.
Yeah.
And here he is saying, just pull all the brakes and start supporting, because that would be the only retribution for the Arab Americans and the Muslim Americans after what they saw your administration do in Gaza. And it's insane that he even mentions Yemen. Yemen was completely supported by the types like himself. Max, I just sent you one more thing on Twitter. It's a new clip that I found recently. I don't know if people have talked about it, but he is the first U.S. official to have met with quote-unquote Caesar, the photojournalist, the military photographer who brought about the Caesar sanctions. And he claims in the C-SPAN, which he shares with under the auspices of WINEP, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy.
Think tank founded out of AIPAC.
Yeah, exactly. And he says that, and while I hope you play the video, because while he's speaking, Caesar texts in. He texts into the group and says, "Hey, thank you for all the great work that you're doing, and I really appreciate." So just play the clip.
On a side note, I was the first U.S. official who reviewed the Caesar files. I was working at the time with Ambassador Robert Ford as one of his liaisons with the Syrian opposition, the activists, the NGOs, many of the peaceful protesters that started the revolution.
Almost as activists.
In the summer of 2013, once Caesar had left Jordan, I had a surreal meeting at a McDonald's in Istanbul, where a member of the opposition came to me. I was finishing a great dinner, and
Hilarious.
He opened up the laptop and showed me 50,000 pictures. They're, well, you can see them here. So there's a lot of people in the US government that are personally invested in the issue of accountability. And we'll make sure that we provide whatever support we can offer to various accountability and transitional justice efforts. I'll stop right here, and I'm sure I'll be taking questions once I sit down.
So and here, just after that, Aaron, he gets the message from Muaz Khatib that Caesar is watching, and he thanks you for all the efforts that you're doing, and he pushes for Caesar, this is back in 2016. Caesar was
This is Caesar.
Yeah.
Okay. So Caesar's a guy. He's basically wearing this Smurf suit. He's completely covered from head to toe. He claims to be a former military photographer for the Syrian government, who's a whistleblower, and Elliot Engel's in the middle here. Engel defeated by Jamal Bowman, but Engel was the top recipient of AIPAC money historically when he was
1.8 million.
Yeah, 1.8 million. And so basically, this is a CIA and Qatari and Israeli scam where they basically, we still don't know who Caesar is. He's running around testifying that he has 50,000 photos of all of these killings by the Syrian government. But if you actually read the fine print, for example, Human Rights Watch analyzed it. Over 50% or close to 50% of those who are dead were killed, are loyalists who were killed in government territory. And then you have people who are killed in auto accidents, just people in regular mortuaries who were photographed. There's no way this guy took all those photos. And the whole story, I mean, I exposed it here. The whole story is an obvious intelligence deception designed to create political momentum for these sanctions, which have reduced the majority of Syrians to poverty, hunger, isolation, and now they're renewing these sanctions and pushing for more through the trip that Hekmat Aboukhater, our guest right now, has exposed. So go ahead, Hekmat.
And Max, one more thing that you yourself have mentioned before is that some of those quote unquote 50,000 pictures of civilians murdered by the Assadist fascistic regime have photos of soldiers with tattoos of Bashar Assad's face on their bodies. So yeah, it's a complete cycle that they all know each other, they all work with each other. They're Zionist adjacent, they work closely with AIPAC. One of the things that I would wish you could show from the article as well is the quote-unquote overtures towards Israel that they kept making in these meetings. So in one of the sessions, Ada Ghanem, meeting with the aide from Senator John Fetterman's team, mentions that the areas liberated in the south, like Suwaida and Daraa, are now the areas from which the Syrian army is lobbing missiles over at Israel. And then the aide, who's like a 25, 24-year-old, just takes it down and notes it down for Fetterman to essentially use as fuel to support this bill, or potentially to even co-author it, as now he's the newly foremost supporter of Zionism in the Democratic Party. And as you can see here, Alberto Hernandez, he's the policy advisor, or the he's essentially a staffer for the ACS. Okay, he's Cuban American, and he at some point was grilled by Senator Rick Scott's policy advisor, and he asks him, "Have you made any overtures? Have you talked at all to your counterparts in the Israeli lobby so that they would vet these policies, they would vet this Syria sanction bill, so we know how to vote on it?" A, admitting that they do not vote on anything that the Israel lobby does not veto, does not approve, and B, asking for any potential connections between the two. And then this guy answers formally no, informally, and then turns towards us, 7 people sitting in the room, and says, "You didn't hear me say that," with a smirk on his face. This guy is such an idiot. He doesn't even understand how serious that statement is, because he's a Cuban American. He's just there because he understands that the cognitive dissonance in his head as a Cuban American, supporting sanctions on his own country, supporting sanctions on Syria, supporting the United States sanctioning of the 25% of the human population on Earth. He justifies all this in his head, and for him, this is just another statement for clout in front of the team of Senator Rick Scott's policy advisor team.
Well, and then we have, that's so revealing. I want to play like the money quote from Wael Al-Zayat that you recorded. Wrong one. Whoops. All right, I lost it.
It's in the same thread.
Yeah, I got it. Basically, he starts lobbying for weapons to jihadists and makes some interesting revelations here. So
we
need the U.S. to look for public-private partnerships.
And to give some money to USAID so they can give it to the implementer.
Wait, this is the wrong one. Oh, because about the stuff going to terrorists. No, we'll go back. Stop freaking out about the stuff going to terrorists, because the Brits are doing it, the Turks are doing it, the Qataris are doing it. There's ways to do this, and it's not just risk mitigation.
We're missing out on a
golden opportunity
to stabilize the region and leverage it for a political settlement.
So what he's referring to here specifically, I think, is officially the U.S.
Stabilization aid.
The U.S. is still sanctioning Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, aka Nusra, aka Al-Qaeda, which is in control of Idlib, the last rebel-controlled province of Syria. So even though the U.S. supports the rebels and helped them capture Idlib. I mean, the U.S. role was instrumental to helping Al Qaeda and its coalition capture Idlib. Officially, the group in control of Idlib, HTS, is sanctioned by the U.S. because they're Al Qaeda. So he's basically trying to say we need to get around that. Stop freaking about this whole terrorist thing because everyone's doing it. That's his argument there.
Not just everyone, because the Turks, the Qataris, and the Brits are doing it. Because for any Syrian or anyone who understands anything about geopolitics, these are the number 1, 2, and 3 candidates for for clean funding. Anyone in Syria who hears this quote, and I plan on translating it and posting it as well, would scoff at this ridiculous statement because they know who Qatar funded in Syria. They know who Turkey funded, and they know exactly what Turkey did when it opened the gates of hell, and they flooded thousands and thousands upon thousands of multinational terrorists into Aleppo, my city, into the rest of Syria. So this statement is entirely ludicrous, and I mean, if he knew that I was recording, God knows, God knows what he talks in meetings when there aren't others attending, when he speaks with people side to side. So continue, please.
Well, and if you read the book of Ben Rhodes, who's a former top official for Obama, he talks about how he tried very hard to lobby against putting HTS, aka Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda on the U.S. terror list because he said it made no sense for us to sanction the same people we were supporting and trying to help. So this is still now people trying to deal with the consequences of that and trying to get around it. But Hekmat, let me ask you, how did you get in there? How did you get access to this meeting?
So I follow them on separate accounts, and I heard that this event was going to happen on the 7th of March. And I decided to show up. I joined and I signed up under a different name. And up until the end, they did not recognize me until I was in a meeting with Zayat. And Zayat has seen me before because I interjected on another one of his meetings. He has blocked me on Twitter. And I saw in his eyes that he wasn't sure who I was, but he remembered my face from somewhere. And towards the end of that first day, Suzanne Sheridian, or whatever her name is, she's the director of ACS. She comes in and talks to me. And then she eventually takes my number and says, you know what, I'm going to reach out to you and convince you that we're on the right side and you got it all wrong. Mm-hmm. And then she never reached out to me. So I was looking forward to that message from her, but she never sent anything. And when I finally confronted them and I said the main thing that was just grinding my gears the entire day, that they would come in, they would make all this mess about Captagon, they would do atrocity propaganda nonstop. They would still push the false and the claims that you yourself, Aaron, have debunked about the gas attacks in Douma in 2013, 2018, 2017. But they wouldn't mention what the bill is about, the main primary purpose of the bill, which is the extension of Caesar. It was mentioned just once, and it was in Ben Cardin's team, because Ben Cardin's team, William Barr, said to Ghanem, he said clearly, dude, Caesar is already too much. It is a vast sanctions bill. It already sanctions too many entities. You want to add more and you want to extend it 8 more years. And that was the only situation where they had a conversation about the extension, because Ghanem was trying to push Ben Cardin, who's a notorious Russiagator and who's a notorious senator who wrote the Magnitsky Act and started our second Cold War with Russia based on Bill Browder's false claims and made up garbage. So this guy, Ben Cardin, even his team was a little bit suspicious and a little bit hesitant about the extension.
I got a hard stop coming up, and we need to bring in Jeremy. So, Hekmat, I guess tell us how they kicked you out, and here's your piece: inside the anti-Syria lobby's Capitol Hill push for more starvation sanctions, and definitely read Hekmat's work in our archives about the impact of sanctions on Syria. But I guess in closing, tell us how your day or lobbying trip ended, and where you think this is all going for Syria, which is in very desperate economic condition right now.
Yeah, well, thanks, Max. Thanks, Aaron. I'm usually an optimist, but just recently, a couple of days ago, the Atlantic Council had Charles Lister and someone named Khatib and a bunch of others, and I sent you a message about that, Max. They're considering a new strategy. They're considering a new strategy on Syria. They're considering a new approach, and they have a bunch of people on and a panel. I hope to write something about that soon, but it's not... It's not promising. It's not Yeah, Qutayba was one of the people there. He's an Idlibi guy. Charles Lister, Qutayba, and others were all in a meeting, and they were discussing publicly what the next steps are, and that does not bode well for the Syrian people, as anyone who knows who these names and people are can tell you. So let's hope for the best.
Thanks so much, Hekmat. And some more news out of think tank world that you'll find amusing is the Middle East Institute, former home of Charles Lister, has hired Labib al-Nahlas, ex-spokesman of Ahrar al-Sham, the Al-Qaeda ally in Syria. They literally hired their former spokesman at a DC think tank while the U.S. is supporting the destruction of Hamas in Gaza. So it doesn't really matter if you're in Al-Qaeda as long as you're down with the U.S.
Well, Hekmat, just tremendous work. This is such important journalism, really brave, really important. It's important for people, especially right now as Israel's waging this genocide, to understand this is not just about Palestine. This is about regional hegemony, and the dirty war in Syria, a major factor for it was trying to destroy a member of the Axis of Resistance, a member of the group that actually fights back against Israeli and U.S. hegemony. And you're exposing here the people inside Washington who, claiming to act in the name of the Syrian people, are actually not only trying to crush the Syrian people, but advancing what are ultimately Israel's interests. And it's really important to call it out, which nobody else is doing. So I just really applaud you for it, and thank you for this really important article you did.
Thank you both.
All right, Hekmat, looking forward to more from you. And where can people find you, support you, etc.?
On Twitter, what the Hekmat, primarily, and on the Grayzone to read my work.
Great. Thanks again. All right, so we're going to bring in another of our contributors at the Grayzone, who is really killing it. He's one of the few people actually in Israel who's not literally killing it. He's there now as a journalist, and he delivered a just deeply disturbing report on the Gaza aid blockades that many Israeli citizens are carrying out. Jeremy Loffredo, welcome, Jeremy.
Hey guys, thank you.
I don't know if you can turn up your volume at all, or gain if that's possible, or just project. But anyway, so you covered. You went. Well, tell us what happened. You went on a bus with some settler through various settlements and wound up at Kerem Shalom, where the aid trucks are lined up and not moving.
Yeah, so there are a few WhatsApp groups with all of these, extremist factions of Israeli society where they communicate and talk about their latest actions to either prolong the genocide or starve the Palestinians. And they have a bus that leaves from Jerusalem, leaves from Tel Aviv, leaves from Haifa. And they have, numerous buses going from the main cities that leave the cities. They go south and they go through the West Bank from top to bottom. They go to 8 or 9 illegal settlements, and like a school bus, they pick up people who are as young as 10 years old and as old as 40 years old, and their parents are putting them on the bus like they're off to school, but they're really off to the Nitzana border crossing or the Kerem Shalom border crossing to block food aid, humanitarian aid for Palestinians.
So we're looking at some of the scenes from your documentary. It's like a 20-minute documentary on these blockades that are being carried out. He's, here's one of the people explaining what they're doing. But let's actually, well, here's one of the interviews you carried out. It will go to the people of Gaza and to Hamas. It will help Hamas. It's very successful. Look, the aid trucks were supposed to be entering Gaza from 10 in the morning today, and we're blocking them from entering. It's been days since any aid trucks have passed through, so there you have it. It works. I think what we need, I don't know, we need to be united and kill all of them. This is a young Jewish Israeli. We all need to go back into Gaza and control all of it. Make it part of our country. So you were hearing a lot of this from people you interviewed.
Yeah, it was totally homogenous. They were all on the same page in terms of what they were doing there, whether it was successful or not, and what needed to happen after the war ended, which was, resettle in Gaza and for the time being, manufacture a starvation there. And so we are left with as little as Palestinian people as possible when the war stops. So it'll be easier to resettle.
Let's watch another interview that you recorded. Deeply disturbing stuff.
From 2002 till recently, we have been through I would say, kind of intifada, a journey of murder, which they use knives to kill Israelis. They use, in many cases, guns. They use pistols. They use cocktail Molotov. They kill a lot of Jews, but we have airplanes, you see. We can erase them 1 second. Once we use what we have, once we know how to use our assets, and not afraid to use what we have, we destroy Gaza. We annihilated a huge part of Gaza. We can do it also. The Palestinian, Judea and Samaria and the West Bank. We have weapons we can use. We need the right circumstances. We need the right leaders. We have goddamn sexy F-16 airplanes to annihilate all our enemies. And then the last of them, when we decide to do so, we get over this kind of conception and kind of state of mind that we are subjected to the world, the community of the world and the nations of the world, and we are somehow limited, but it's only temporarily. We will unleash our strengths very much soon.
So he's basically saying we can commit more genocide.
Yeah, and it's mostly these people there, mostly opposed to Netanyahu from the right. They think he's bending a knee to the United States and the international community. They think he's not tough enough on the Palestinians, and they think he needs to stand up to the international community. Whereas here in America, you would think that the people on the right in Israel are, they're all on board with Bibi, but a lot of them don't like him because he's not right-wing enough, especially these people.
Well, how do they get the goddamn sexy F-16s if it isn't from the U.S.? But, so there's like a messianic quality among.
No, for sure.
I mean, who are they? How would you characterize them? Do they come from different sectors of Israeli society?
They like half of them probably come from settlements in the West Bank, and the other half live in more of the metropolitan areas of Israel. But they all gather to block this humanitarian aid from reaching the Palestinians.
Yeah. And there was one interview that I think, all of these interviews I think should be entered at the International Court of Justice or the ICC if we didn't have like a British state asset there, Karim Khan, so he's not doing anything. But here in particular, I mean, you basically got someone confessing a war crime on camera to you.
Training for 1 month, and then we got inside Gaza. And then we've been there for 2 months. My unit was in charge of explosions. We blew up houses of terrorists, mosque, UN offices.
We blew up UN offices.
We got into some UN office that was in charge of helping families in Gaza that was affected by the war, and we destroyed it. We've been dealing with the tunnels.
Were you ever in a tunnel?
No. We've been training for 1 month, and then we got inside Gaza.
So, yeah, how did that exchange come about?
When I first went there, I was there probably 7 or 8 times in total at the border crossings with these people. In the beginning, I would go with people I met last time I was in Palestine, mostly like leftist activists, people who were Israelis who were stopping the settlers from attacking Palestinians in the West Bank. And I went with them the first 2 times, and I noticed that they couldn't help themselves but to argue with these people. And you're not going to turn these fanatics into leftist anti-Zionist activists in one argument or conversation. And it was kind of people were looking at me, these extremists were looking at me as if I was opposed to them, as if I didn't like them, and so they weren't being candid with me. So I started going alone. That's when I started taking the bus, and people had saw me there for maybe 1 or 2 times. They saw me walking around. They began to know my face, and that's when they would, essentially admit to war crimes, just candidly, as if it was no big deal.
I guess it really shows that they don't feel that they're ever going to be held accountable. There's just a sense of a culture of impunity that they could just boast about blowing up United Nations offices. I mean, he even describes the office as a place that helps get resources to like needy families. And he doesn't feel any shame about it.
In their eyes, I mean, even stopping the humanitarian aid, they are helping end the war. They would say that this is the peaceful way to be an Israeli citizen right now, because you're stopping the enemy from getting resources, and by stopping the enemy from getting resources, you're making the war end faster. So that's how they're thinking about this.
Well, you went on another leg of the genocide tour where you went with people trying to resettle Gaza.
Yeah.
And let's watch one of your interviews from this leg of the trip.
We love the Gaza Strip. We can't just take a whole strip of land.
I wish the volume was up.
Israelis can't live there. That doesn't make sense.
It's an American accent.
Sovereign state.
Would you live there? Would you live there? Of course I'd live in Gaza. By the beach?
Yes.
Oh, for sure.
Yes, my husband's also talking about building. He has a yeshiva.
Her husband wants to build a yeshiva in Gaza.
In Gaza. We have lists already about 500 families that are willing, on the drop of a hat, to just move into. We have North, Central, and South Gaza, and people are going to start building towns. We have names of the towns. We have where we're building them. It's already being planned, and we have people signed up. You can't leave it without Jews in the Gaza Strip. It's too big a piece of land. It's too important for us to let it become Hamas town, as we call it, full of terrorists.
So this is a woman with a New York accent describing how Gaza will be ethnically cleansed, and 500 families have signed up to live everywhere from Rafah to the Jabalia refugee camp once it's cleared. And she wants, it sounds like a Brooklyn accent.
Staten Island.
Staten Island. She's from Staten Island. Okay. Shaolin, as it's known more popularly. So how did you wind up on? She's wearing orange, which is what the Gush Katif settlers wore, or people in solidarity with the Gush Katif, the orange cell. Tell us like how you wound up on that part of the.
Someone sent me a poster in Hebrew, and I truly Google Translate the app on my phone. It was a giant help in these circumstances. But they would have a poster sent in a WhatsApp. And they were meeting at the train station in Surot, and that's 1 mile east of the Erez border crossing into Gaza. And so they met in this parking lot, and they were all wearing orange. They were all talking about Gush Katif. They were all talking about how they need to go back. They had posters, they had signs, everything was orange, and they said they were going to march there, but they ended up not marching. They got in their cars. They had a caravan of maybe 30 cars drive to the Erez border crossing. They were stopped at a military roadblock. The military said, you can't go this way. You can't do this. They said, okay. They took a dirt road. They drove through a bunch of back roads, agriculture land of different kibbutzes, and they drove straight to the Arab border crossing. The military maybe like put their hands up. They said, "Yeah, come on, you can't go into Gaza." And they said they just drove anyway. The military did not stop them, and they drove straight into Gaza without any military stopping them. They were building like symbolic outposts, like they brought wood and hammers and saws with them, as if to say, like, look, we've built 2 wooden homes here, and we're going to be back for more. This is ours. And so they were building inside of Gaza. And the younger settlers were yelling at the military when they were finally removed for their own safety. Were yelling at the military, saying that they are Hamas, calling IDF soldiers Hamas for not allowing them to build in Gaza right now.
So, and the soldiers have been generally very permissive with them. I mean, here we see like a woman being able to walk up to Egyptian soldiers in an Egyptian truck. I mean, look at this. Well, I mean, what did you witness? The soldiers were basically working alongside them.
Of course, I think the government of Israel and the military, I mean, as I pointed out in the report, they can't close the humanitarian aid crossings at the border by themselves without looking like barbarians. They need these Israeli citizens to get bused to the border into the closed military zone, which technically no civilian is allowed. They should be arrested immediately and taken out of there. They're all allowed there. And as soon as they show up, the military says, I guess we have to close the border crossing for the day. No humanitarian aid to Gaza today. So
let's play one of these guys.
Yeah, of course.
The best way is to transfer them to Europe. Europe already accepted, past the 10 years, accepted more than 100 million refugees. I don't think that another 1.5 million refugees would make any difference for the Europeans. And as the Bible says, this place is for us. It's promised for us, so they can starve to death to pay on the things that they've done to us on the 7th of October.
Would you live in Gaza once all is said and done?
Totally. If my wife would agree for that, totally, I would go live over there. The best.
Well, British accent.
He's from South Africa.
I wish the anti-immigrant America First members of Congress could see that, because he's basically saying we're going to create a migration crisis, and Europe and the West will take everyone that we've ethnically cleansed. That's kind of what the floating dock the Biden administration's building is for. But it doesn't get any clearer than that. Just pure genocide. And before that, in your video, he's talking about the friendly relationship they have with the police and the military.
Yeah, I would document that on camera. There's a lot of things happening off camera as well. The protesters would be giving baked goods, croissants, pastries, ice water, punch to the IDF soldiers, who should have been arresting them, rounding them up, and putting them outside the closed military zone. And the IDF soldiers were coming out of their bunkers, their offices that were located on the border crossing, and cutting up watermelon for the protesters, cutting up watermelon, cold watermelon. It was, we were in the desert, it was 85 degrees, giving them juice, giving them watermelon, giving them sandwiches that are cut up. They were clearly on the same team, and they were sympathetic towards the IDF soldiers, who did have to sometimes say, hey, don't go into Egypt, don't cross the border, that's going to cause a problem for us, saying like, they have their orders, we can't be breaking the law all the time, but we can be manufacturing a famine on the other side of the border. But they were all on the same team. They're all friends. They're all eating together, dancing together, having fun.
And so how influential have they been in preventing aid from going into Gaza? How pivotal is their blockade?
Well, from what I saw, so long as protesters go there, whether it's 10 or 150, if there are civilians in the closed military zone that is at the border crossing, they shut the border crossing down for safety reasons, as if we can't have a open border with a different country if there's civilians by the border. It's just not safe. So as long as the blockers go there in whatever number they show up in, they close the border down for the day. So I was there 7 or 8 times. The aid gate had not opened once.
And the U.S. is doing nothing about this and saying nothing about it. I mean, you could send embassy officials down there to document this. I saw the Palestinian ambassador Hussam Zomlot in the UK shared your video, and I mean it's diplomatically significant that this is happening. But I mean, we've heard nothing from the U.S. embassy about these genocide zombies just marching on Egyptian aid trucks.
It's totally approved by the Israeli authorities. They should be not allowed anywhere near this border crossing. And they're not only allowed near it, they're allowed to throw parties next to it and disrupt international relations with military officers and police giving everybody high fives and singing. It's dystopian, of course.
Yeah, it's one of the most important pieces we've published since October 7th. And not just because it kind of continues the tradition of my Feeling the Hate videos, which show the true face of Zionism as a genocidal ideology, but because it really exposes how the Israeli government is using these fanatics as a kind of proxy in order to carry out actions that it couldn't quite get away with because it can't directly send its soldiers in the way of these aid trucks, but they create various security incidents and then they shut down the crossings. So they're starving people. It's unclear how many lives they've cost, but we're seeing starving children day after day, and the genocidal mentality is on full display. By the way, like Clarissa Ward from CNN, wasn't she among the
She was there once. She was there once. Yeah, of course.
Why didn't CNN show the same level of why didn't they just ask them basic questions and let them speak for themselves?
I think what happened was they had a camera crew of 4 or 5 people, and it was all there was actually one point where the producer for the CNN crew was interviewing someone and then shuffling people with flags behind the person being interviewed to create the image that they were holding flags and being interviewed. Like, it was all very scripted. These people were not walking anywhere. They were grabbed from the corner and told to go behind the camera, behind the person being interviewed. It was like a movie was being concocted.
So the CNN producer was actually scripting a scene.
That's exactly what was happening.
You saw that take place.
I saw her say, go behind the person, and they bring their flags behind the person being interviewed. So it looked more cinematic.
But, at the same time, their report didn't have any impact like yours because they weren't letting them speak their minds about the desire to commit genocide and resettle Gaza.
No, they weren't asking those questions.
I mean, that's just, it's amazing to actually see CNN in the field and see how they operate. But this is real journalism. I mean, to me, this is what journalism is all about. And it only just took you just getting there, getting your feet on the ground to show how genocide is being carried out. And I really do think this should be entered as evidence at the International Court of Justice. Aaron, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
There is, and Max, I know you have to go soon, but there is some breaking news I definitely want to get you to respond to because it has to do with the Hamas sexual violence scam that we've exposed, and there's a really important development on that. So, Jeremy, anything more that you want to say before we let you go?
No, that's it. Thank you, guys.
All right, thanks a lot, Jeremy. We're going to be running more reports from Jeremy from Israel, Palestine. I know he has an important report on the Palestinian prisoners issue. What's happening in the old city to the Armenian community. And he's just all over the place with your support as patrons and supporters of the Grayzone. He's there doing what the rest of the media refuses to do. So, well, not the rest of it, but most of it. Anyway, thanks a lot, Jeremy. Thanks for being here. All right. Stay safe. Aaron, what happened?
Very briefly. So, there's been yet another serious blow to the New York Times story accusing Hamas of weaponizing sexual violence. And this latest piece of evidence actually comes from the New York Times itself. if you read our article that we did months ago on the problems with that New York Times story accusing Hamas of sexual violence, we pointed out the serious flaws of a supposed paramedic witness who claimed that 2 female victims at Kibbutz Be'eri bore the signs of sexual violence. And we pointed out there were major problems with this paramedic's testimony, who was also part of a Israeli paramilitary unit. I believe the name was G, right?
Yeah.
Well, now this is breaking from the
Real
New York
name
Times.
Guy Melamed.
Well, this is now breaking from the New York Times. The New York Times has just put this out. Israeli soldiers' video undercuts medic's account of sexual assault. Israeli soldiers' video undercuts medic's account of sexual assault. And it says this. New video has surfaced that undercuts the account of an Israeli military paramedic who said 2 teenagers killed in the Hamas-led terrorist attack on October 7th were sexually assaulted. The unnamed paramedic from an Israeli commando unit was among dozens of people interviewed for a December 28th article by The Times that examined sexual violence on October 7th. He said he discovered the bodies of 2 partially clothed teenage girls in a home in Kibbutz Be'eri that bore signs of sexual violence. But footage taken by an Israeli soldier who was in Be'eri on October 7th, which was viewed by leading community members in February, by The Times this month, shows the bodies of 3 female victims fully clothed and with no apparent signs of sexual violence at a home where many residents had believed the assaults occurred. So this is the New York Times undercutting its own claims, and one of the key supposed witnesses who was used to make them.
Well, we had previously we were one of the first out of the gate to explain how the Sharabi sisters, who the Intercept for some reason refused to name, were not found in the state that G reported them in. We also exposed the name of G as Guy Melamed from the 669 rescue unit, paramedics unit, and that he was a veteran liar who had previously said he found a baby in a garbage can, which didn't happen. So in any case, now that the New York Times is doing this kind of reporting that we and that they found, I guess they were looking for the forensic or the hard evidence that wasn't there yet. Now that they have it, they have to retract. I mean, there has to be retractions. I don't know how they can have one article stating that something is false by someone who's making that statement in another article. That, and I think there is an internal crisis brewing at the New York Times. I'm not basing that just on my own feelings. I have learned some things about questions being asked at high levels about this article by Jeffrey Gettleman and Nat Schwartz and Adam Sella.
Yeah.
And
I
know that they're reading our work.
Oh yeah. Oh, of course they are, because they had to respond to it in an article, in a follow-up article that they did after we exposed all the flaws, and they responded to all our, they attempted to respond to all our points, of course, without naming or citing us. But this is classic. Read this here. Reached by the Times, the medic declined to say whether he still stood by the account, saying he would like to put the attacks behind him. So, which is just classic. We've seen this now many times. The same thing with that other supposed witness. What was his name? Roz Cohen.
Yeah.
Who claimed to have seen all these horrible things, and then when flaws in his story were pointed out by us and others, he then said he was too traumatized to speak about it anymore. So now we're seeing something similar here. This supposed witness, this medic, he doesn't want to talk about it anymore. He's trying to put everything behind him, which is a very convenient excuse.
I mean, now that we're on this, I mean, here's another body blow to the New York Times.
Are you able to share the photographic evidence with us?
This is Yossi Landa from Zaka, major source in 2 New York Times articles on sexual violence on October 7th, being asked about the pregnant woman whose fetus was cut from her, which he claimed took place. And he's now on the defensive. He's being interviewed by Al Jazeera for their October 7th documentary, which just came out.
To show you. Yes.
So I'll show you. He says he's going to show
Where's
them.
my phone? Oh,
Where's my
sorry.
phone? He's nervous. He's melting down.
I will not put it in front of the
No,
camera.
no, that's fine. I'll come and look.
Don't put it in front of the camera because
This is
we
the
won't,
knife they used.
Killed, but
Over here was the woman.
But that's the imagery after the bodies had been cleared away. Oh.
Yes. This is the baby. This is it.
I'm sorry to be graphic here, but I can't see a baby here.
You can't see the baby but this is the picture of the mother.
Okay.
For sure,
He says it. Here's the baby, and then the journalist can't see the baby, and so he says, "Well, here's the picture of the mother." So there is no baby, but there's a bigger issue here, which is that, as I pointed out, the New York Times reported. This is in the New York Times, systematic screams without words, systematic sexual violence on October 7th article. I did not take pictures because we are not allowed to take pictures, said Yossi Landau, a Zaka volunteer. In retrospect, I regret it. So the New York Times took him at his word, used him as a source on this article. And then for Al Jazeera, when he's questioned on all his lies, he whips out the phone and says, "Here's some pictures I took." So he's lying. He lied to the New York Times on multiple levels, and he's quoted in 2 separate New York Times articles claiming he took pictures, or that he was not allowed to take pictures, and then he's whipping out pictures for Al Jazeera. So the guy's just a complete fabricator. This is criminal mendacity from one of the most mendacious governments on the planet, covering up genocide. And now I don't know. I mean, I don't know why the New York Times did that article, unless they're trying to lay the groundwork for retraction.
Well, it's not surprising. I mean, and again, if you go back to our article from months ago, we pointed out all the problems with this guy's testimony, including on his claim about seeing these 2 alleged female victims of sexual violence at Kibbutz Be'eri. Now the Times itself is confirming it. It just underscores what a fraud Jeffrey Gettleman is and his colleagues, and how the story has to be retracted. As you pointed out, how can they stand behind a story that the Times itself is now even debunking? It has to be retracted.
Well, we're going to keep pushing on that. Thank you all. I mean, this has been another incredible audience. We're closing in on 12,000. So we really appreciate all the newcomers, all the Grayzone veterans who've been here with us through all the difficult times. But it's thanks to your support that we're able to do the kind of journalism, support the kind of journalism that Hekmat and Jeremy are doing. We've got some incredible pieces up by Kit Clarenberg, including a new expose on the 25th anniversary of NATO's assault on Serbia, exposing Tony Blair pushing for literal state terror on Serbia. There's so much incredible stuff on the site right now. Couldn't be more proud of the content we're putting out. And Aaron, thanks so much for joining us so early in the day where you are.
No sweat. Thanks everyone for tuning in. The place to support the Grayzone is on the screen below, and we'll be back soon.
Peace.
Peace, everybody.